Hey there, and welcome to Get Career Curious, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of different careers, how to get there, what the job is really like, and the impact it makes. I'm your host, Marita McCahill, and today we're diving into the world of education with Nathan Gorsch, a nationally recognized leader in education. Over the past 2 decades, Nathan has worn many hats: teacher, coach, middle school and high school assistant principal, high school principal, and now executive director for the Colorado Springs School of Technology. As a sought-after speaker and consultant, Nathan has worked with schools and districts across the U.S. and Canada. If you're curious about what it takes to lead in education, drive innovation in schools, and make a lasting impact with students, you won't want to miss this conversation. Hi, Nathan. Nice to have you on today.
Hi, Marita. Thanks for having me.
Nathan, did you always know you wanted to be a teacher?
That's a great question. No, actually, I did everything in my power to not become a teacher. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, a small town in Iowa, and I had a lot of teachers that were encouraging me, hey, you should go into education. You should go into education. And so me being the teenager I was, said, absolutely not. There's no way. Just a quick fun story. And these were different times. I'm old, but we had a substitute teacher that didn't show up one day and was supposed to sub for one of our teachers at the high school because they didn't have anybody to cover the class. The secretary of the school actually came and pulled me out of class and said, hey, we need you to cover this class. Can you teach freshmen? And I was like, sure, whatever. And so jumped in. It was a careers class and I ended up kind of teaching the lesson. And then I had a bunch of teachers like, oh my gosh, see, you should be a teacher. And so I went to school. I went to college as a business major initially. My freshman year, I was a business major and then decided that really wasn't the path for me. And then I actually went to a small Christian school and was going to be a pastor and went to school for that for a few years. And I did an internship my senior year of college with a church and I didn't enjoy it. And what I loved was teaching. And so went back, changed my major. And after all these years, education finally caught up to me and said, yep, you're going to be a teacher.
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah.
What do you think made people see in you, even as a young kid, like you'd be a great teacher? What kind of qualities were people seeing?
I think I've always enjoyed building relationships with people to start with. I'm very curious and I like to know people and what makes them tick and what's important to them and why they make the decisions that they do. I really enjoy kind of social sciences and sociology and the understanding of people. And then I hope I'm pretty good at explaining things. I love to think in metaphors and I love to think in analogies. And so I hope that I try to take complex ideas or things that may not make sense and try to make them make sense. Now, my daughter might say I mansplain too much, but I think there are some people that just explain things well. And I hope those people.
What was your first teaching job like? What were you doing?
Yeah. So I student taught in Peoria, Illinois, in a pretty tough school, honestly. It ended up closing not too long after I was done working there, but I loved the interaction and some kids that were from some tough situations, but kind of was able to see the light bulb go off with them with some ideas or things maybe that were different than their experience. And so I did that. And then my wife is also an educator. And this is kind of silly, but I was coaching baseball and I was on a road trip and having dinner with one of our alumni. And he made a simple statement to me. He said, you can live where you want, right? And I was like, well, yeah, of course. We all know that. But I came back and I said to my wife, I said, where do you want to live? And she said, I want to live in Colorado. And I said, me too, let's go. And so we didn't know a soul in Colorado, but started applying for jobs all over Colorado. And yeah, we've been here ever since.
That actually is something I never thought about with teaching, but a real benefit is that you can move locations. Everywhere needs teachers, especially good teachers. So beyond, I'm assuming you have to change your licensing in a state, which could be kind of a hassle, but is that true? Is it hard to do to change states? Or
most states have reciprocal agreements. My license was actually an Illinois license because that's where we went to college. Illinois and Colorado had a reciprocal agreement that they would honor each other's licenses. I think that's got me even more flexible. You get a license in one state and if it's not transferable, it's pretty close. You might have to do another set of paperwork or another class or something like that.
That is a complete positive in my mind that you're able to move. If you are a teacher, it's a job that can travel with you, which is a huge benefit.
Yeah. Every place has schools, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So how many years did you teach before moving into administration?
Yeah. So I'm kind of a rare case. I actually only taught for 3 years. I had one of my mentors and this is biased, but he said, you did more in 3 years than most people do in 10. And so, but I pretty quickly, it might even been my first or second year, I had some veteran teachers come to me and say, hey, you really should think about becoming a school leader. You really should think about school administration. And I was like, I need to figure out this teaching thing first. And they're like, you're good. So I started my administrative program and was fortunate enough to get a job as an assistant principal at a junior high. I was 27, a snot-nosed kid who the first teacher evaluation I ever did, the teacher said, Nathan, I've been teaching longer than you've been alive. And I was like, you're right. And I have a lot to learn from you. Right. Yes. And so, it was a really hard job. I did all the discipline and was the athletic director. I did half the teacher evaluations. It was a really challenging job. But I wouldn't trade that for anything because I learned a lot.
So to move in from being a teacher to going into administration, what did it require?
Yeah. So you have to have a master's and then you have to have an administrative license. And oftentimes those programs go together. So you might get a master's in school leadership. And along with that, you'll get your administrative license. I did it a little bit different. I started just thinking I wanted to teach for a while. So I did my master's in curriculum and instruction. And then I did my administrative program. And that was through Colorado Christian University. And then about a year later, as soon as I got my master's done, I ended up doing my principal licensure through University of Denver. And that was really focused around people that already had their master's and just wanted to get their administrative license.
And did you do this all while teaching or?
Yeah, I did.
And is that the normal kind of career path when you do that?
Yeah, it is. And most of those classes are available. Like I did weekend programs for both my master's and my administrative. So it was all day Saturday. And then sometimes there were classes on Sundays. And then some of it was independent as well. But yeah, it was kind of built for working adults to be able to go back and get their schooling.
Can you talk to me specifically about how you grew your career into creating the Village High School, which my children have gone to and loved? It's a very unique model.
Let me talk about the path and then I'll really focus on the founding of Village High School and the idea behind that. So I was a middle school assistant principal for a few years. And I had been a high school teacher and high school is really more what fit me. Some people love middle school and that's their passion. I liked it okay, but I knew I would always get back to the high school. So I left the middle school and went to a high school in Fountain, Fort Carson, which is also southern part of the city. That's a unique place. Half of the kids that go to school there actually are connected with the military, particularly the Army. So lots of kids live on Fort Carson that go to school there. And I think the biggest learning I had in that experience was just this idea of community. And the principal I worked for there was very relational and almost pastoral. He would stand at the front door and greet kids as they came in. And we had kids that we were their fourth high school in 4 years because mom or dad had been deployed or had been moving around. And so it was really kind of our focus there was make me care. Why should I care about this school any more than the last three? And I think we did a really nice job of building relationships and connecting with kids and giving them a home. I really enjoyed that job and the team I worked with. I love the military connectedness. I could just move from Army to Air Force and make that happen. And so I knew that there was going to be an opening at Air Academy and I knew I needed to get my name out there. So I actually interviewed at Pine Creek High School as a practice interview to get the job I really wanted at Air Academy. I guess my advice for your listeners is never apply for a job that you don't necessarily want because you might get it, right? And so I ended up applying for that really, like I said, it was more of a practice interview and ended up getting offered the position and took it. And it was a good fit. And I was the assistant principal there for about 4 years. And I really enjoyed it, but and it's a school with a good reputation and lots of families are interested in sending their kids there. But as I walked around on a daily basis and I watched the student experience, I really tried to put myself in the shoes of students as much as possible. And I didn't love it. And I know they didn't love it. It was, sitting in class 7, 8 hours a day, being talked at, not having a lot of control, not having a lot of autonomy, not having a lot of say in the experience. And it was pretty brutal. No fault of the teachers. They were doing the best they could and using the training that they had, but the world has changed more rapidly than our education system. And I just saw this massive disconnect between what we were trying to do with students and what students actually need, and started messaging that out a little bit. Like, we probably need to change. We probably need to think about our school model. And to be blunt, most people looked at me like I was crazy. Like,
yeah,
why would we do that? Like, this place is awesome. And don't you see all the
it's a traditional high school model.
Correct. And which has served us for hundreds of years, right? I don't know that there's a lot of kids that thrive in that environment. And so just started this like journey of what if we were to do this over scratch and not build the same thing again, and kind of started meet with a group of other people who were crazy, innovative, creative, and said, you know what, I think my best path forward is actually to create a parallel system. I don't think I can create the change that I want to see within the system. I think I need to create a parallel system alongside of it. At that time, I was reading a lot about disruptive theory and some other things. And so I was like, I don't think I want to start a charter school. That would be a path, particularly in Colorado. If you have an idea for a school, you can start a new school. But I said, what opportunities might be out there? And at that time, the district had an online high school that had started about 7 years prior. And the principal of that school I knew was looking to move up in the organization, and that it was likely going to open. And so I really kind of honed in on, I think that's the place that I could do some crazy things, and met with the principal and said, hey, here's some of what I'm thinking. Do you think that would fly in the school? He was very encouraging and said, yeah, I think that we're pretty open as a community. We're pretty open to change. And so he ended up taking a job. And so I ended up applying. Funny enough, at that time, there were a couple middle school principal jobs open, and then Academy Online High School principal job was open. And initially I put in for all three because I was kind of ready in my career to be a principal. And then called HR and actually pulled out of the 2 traditional middle school jobs and said, I only want Academy Online. And I actually got a call from the director of human resources, like, are you sure? Like, this seems a little disconnected from who I know you to be. And I was like, no, I have these crazy ideas of what we could do there. And so I want to put all my eggs in that one basket. And if it doesn't happen, it's fine. I'm ready to do something creative. I'm ready to do something different. So applied, interviewed, ended up getting the job with this idea of the power of online learning. It was personalization, not location, was really the big framework behind it. And if we use online tools for personalization, it could free up time for us to do other things with students, and kind of put education back into students' hands instead of in the teacher's hands, where instead we can work side by side rather than us doing it to them. And so, so that first year started planning, and got some staff members involved. And so my second year, we opened the blended program through Academy Online, which was quickly then christened the Village at Academy Online High School. We actually allowed students to name the school, which is kind of a fun piece of the story. They named it the Village. And then the online school transitioned into a fully blended program called Village High School that I know I've had several of your children go through. But yeah, the big idea there is, let's treat kids like they're adults. Let's treat them like they're in college when they're in high school, with all the freedom and responsibility that goes with that. So that they can kind of practice being adults in a place that is what it looks like, but also is going to teach them adult-like responsibility and adult-like skills while they're still in high school.
So you are kind of an entrepreneur, or I could say a revolutionary in the education system, which is super unique. And the fact that you were able to really change how a school curriculum is delivered to students is very cool to see in your own career. When you say, I'm going to go into teaching, I don't think many people see how many doors can be opened with one career path.
Yeah. So let me touch on the entrepreneur piece. I told you my freshman year of college, I was a business major, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny to see all those come full circle. And I've told people I'm an entrepreneur. I just get to do it with other people's money. I get to start these organizations, but with public money, which is cool in and of itself. I'm like, how do you take a risk that really doesn't feel like much of a risk? So started it. I knew it was going to be a great experience for students. I had my assumption that it was also going to be a really great place for adults, but I wanted to make sure that we were really thoughtful about tending that and building it so that it would also be a great place for adults that they would want to work. So most people that go into education, yes, they may like their content. They may like math or science or social studies or art. Really, most of them go into it because they really like young people and they want to make a difference in the lives of young people who are in this very, very special stage in life where they're, trying to figure out who they are and what they want to do. And that's very rewarding and valuable. And so the challenge though, in a traditional teaching role is, which of those is more important? Is it more important to cover the content or more important to build relationships? And you try to do both. And when you try to do both, it really, it can burn you out. And so, what we kind of said with our framework was, let's use the online tools to really make a teacher's life somewhat easier on that side of things. So if you don't have to create all your own lesson plans, you don't have to spend a ton of time grading. Instead, you have the time and opportunity to use that time to build relationships with students. And so the staff and the folks that we had some really amazing people, and then we would have a position and I would say to my staff, all right, we have this position. Who do you know? And so, we would kind of get in these networks and then pull in and I would call them the dream team. I mean, they were a really amazing group of professionals, that really, and then I think we did a nice job of tending the culture and making sure that we never lost sight of why we did what we did, and why we do what we do, which is ultimately for the benefit of students and the benefit of individual students. So it really moved from this like system factory model to this artisan individual. And I think a whole lot of people were more attracted to that in the profession for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think what I appreciate most about kind of your journey is that people have in their mind a conception of what a life as a teacher would be like. And there are examples of people who go into teaching and then stay in it for their entire career. But it sounds like one of the big benefits of a degree in education is that you do have some really unique opportunities to grow and change even as an adult. Like you're continuing to adapt your career even now. So I think that's something that's not often seen when people are looking at careers and going into education, is that there is so many different paths you can take.
Yeah. Some people that were teachers that went into other professions and got into corporate training or even financial planning because they were really good at explaining things, or maybe even government. And so those skills that you learn in being in education do translate. The other unique thing that I think probably most people wouldn't think of is it also provides some time and some margin because, you don't have summers off, but you have more flexibility in the summer. You aren't necessarily off over breaks, but you have more flexibility. And so I know a lot of educators that also do side businesses or might have their own organizations. Just quickly, like a couple things. So I've helped start a youth baseball organization that took off because I kind of had the margin over the summer, and it fit very neatly. I'm about young people and experiences for young people. And then now as my career has grown, I have this unique expertise in some areas. And so I got called on to be a consultant. And so I've been able to do some various consulting with schools around Colorado, schools around the country, and even a couple schools in Canada. And so I'm not sure if I would have gone into another career field. I'm not sure that those things would have happened. And it's not that I wouldn't say that being in education is easier than other jobs. In many ways, it's harder, but it just kind of lends itself to being creative and lends itself to seeing beyond and kind of going back to your core values. I mean, I think of the baseball organization and even consulting. Yeah, I'm still trying to help people. It's still about trying to make the world a better place for young people, which is why I got into the profession to begin with. I've just found other avenues and outlets for that.
Now, I was going to ask you what's your favorite part of your job, but you kind of just said it, like you're in it to help young people.
Yeah.
And that's what brings you joy. And that's kind of the purpose of me talking with people in different careers is like, what does bring you joy and gives you meaning in your life? And a large part of your life is your career. I think when I've talked with teachers, it is meaningful that they're helping people and that you've had that opportunity in your career, not only to help students, but also to help mentor young teachers and as they grow their careers as well. Now, having said that, what is your most challenging part of your job?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm going to answer both questions with the same answer. So what do I love the most about my job and what's the most challenging part of my job? And it comes down to graduation day. My favorite part of my job is graduation day, knowing that students have crossed the finish line, knowing that many of them face immense obstacles or challenges, and to see them walk across and really go on to the next stage in life, unbelievably rewarding. But it also is a gutting experience when you build a relational model and you get to know students and families on such a deep level to know that I don't know when I'm going to see this person again. Some of these people I may never see again. And I mean, these are people I've seen almost every day for 4 years and I may never see them again. Yeah. So that was a long-winded answer, but I think that encapsulates being an educator well, is that like super proud of all the accomplishments, but also very sad because they don't need us anymore.
Well, that's kind of like a parent. The end goal is right to launch someone who's a productive member of society. So yeah, it's bittersweet.
Yeah.
Also, I think when people leave high school, they've spent so much time getting good grades so they can get into college to do what? Like that's the real question. What is it you want to do? And you might think you want to study something, but have you spent any time really in that field or talking with people in that field? I think so much more time could be used in high school preparing for college. So when you go, if that's your career path you want, that you're not changing majors and picking something that ultimately doesn't serve you.
Mm-hmm. Well, a couple points. It's never been easier in the history of the world to get into college. Like colleges are hurting for kids. And so this grade game, to be competitive, the rules have changed, but yet we maybe philosophically haven't changed with it. And then the second thing is it really goes back to that idea I talked before about the importance or lack of importance of content. So much of high school is about content and about facts. Somebody said this the other day, and I really love it. High school has been about collecting facts, and it needs to be about connecting dots. And I really love that idea. And so do we really care if you know Shakespeare? Do we really care if you've read Romeo and Juliet? Or do we care that you know the idea behind Romeo and Juliet? And so, I even think about like quizzes and assessments and tests. Like, is it about the facts of the story? Or is it about how the story relates to the rest of the world or the rest of life? And so I think we're starting to see that shift. But on a daily basis, how much content do I use from high school? How much content do you use from high school?
Yeah.
But do we use skills we learn?
Yeah.
And so like, I think we have to shift from the focus of content to the focus on skills and exposure and us figuring out who we are and what we're good at and not good at. And really at the end of the day, if I could teach a kid how to learn, like that is the most important skill. It's actually not what they learn. It's do they know how to learn? Because if they go into their first job, very rarely is the person going to say, well, what did you learn in high school or college? Instead, they're going to say, here's the manual for organization, and I want you to learn everything you can. And so at that point, it really is about the skill of learning.
So what advice would you give to high school students or those in early college about gaining useful skills or even skills that might transfer to a career?
Yeah. I think my advice would be, there's a book called Designing Your Life, which is actually, probably most of your listeners are familiar with design thinking. And design thinking is this idea of like, I identify a problem and kind of try to figure that problem out, but then I create some solutions, but then I prototype solutions. And the premise behind this book is you do the same thing with your life. And I'm actually a big fan of prototyping your life. And so like, I think you have to find a small entry point or a small way to experience that life you're thinking about before you go all in. And so I think, career mentorships, internships, some of those experiences have never been more valuable for kids to figure out, is this what I really want to do? You can create some of those experiences yourself. One thing I do know is that most people that have a job that they like, they love talking about it. They love sharing. They want other people to be interested because they enjoy it. And so sometimes it's as simple as just talking to your dentist. Do you like being a dentist? Why do you like being a dentist?
Yeah.
What does being a dentist do for you or your family that you really enjoy? What are the downsides to being a dentist? And kind of going through that exercise before ever pursuing being a dentist. And so I think there's different ways to prototype, but I think some of it is like just this exercise in like visioning and imagining what my life looks like if I do this thing. I try to do that in my own life. I try to do that with my kids, with my own children. And like, what does it look and feel like? And you can't always have all the answers to that, but you can start to play around with it to figure that out.
Agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is truly why I'm doing this podcast, because it's funny you said that. I dreaded when people would ask me what I did for a living because I didn't enjoy what I was doing. And it was making me a lot of money and it was a very impressive career, but it was not fulfilling at all. But I needed, at that time, I needed to make money and support my family. So I do think if you can find a career that you love to talk about and you're super excited to do every day is truly a gift. So it's getting kids to do the work up front so that they can design their life. And it is fun talking with you because you're always so excited to talk about your work.
Yeah, I do. I love it. Don't tell anybody, but it's kind of fun. Well, and there was a quote, and I don't know if you saw it, but there was a quote at the Village on one of the walls. It was actually in a conference room, but it's one of my favorite quotes. The quote is, "You will find your purpose at the intersection of your passion and the world's greatest need." And I really love that. And the idea being like, I think I'm really good as an educator, but I actually see the need is to reinvent school and to create new options for kids. And so the intersection of that is really where I find my purpose. And I think, that's a dangerous idea of purpose, because if you don't find it, like, I think sometimes we leave people out of that. It can be very exclusive, and I hope it's a little more inclusive, but there is nothing better than when you find what you love and meet that need, and that intersection is a really cool thing.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love that. If someone was looking at a future in education, what advice would you give to them? Because I do think there's some limitations in going into education, but there's some great upsides as well.
Yeah, it is. I guess the first thing I would say is it's not a short-term commitment. It's a long-term commitment. And I think there's a lot of people that are like, I'm going to try teaching. I'm going to do it for a short period of time, and then I'm going to go get a real job. I'm going to go do something else. And you can do that, but it's a mismatch. Financially, you make the least amount of money in your first few years as a teacher. And you start to pay into a retirement system, generally speaking, that really values and rewards the longer you're in the system. And so you actually are not doing yourself any favors, because you're maybe not advancing your career. Now, maybe you're getting skills that you're going to take it somewhere else. Great.
Yeah.
But you're not getting compensated well for a really hard job that does, I don't want to say it gets easier over time, but you gain experience and you can be more successful, and you start to build kind of your tools and your framework. But I do think that there's this like, I'm going to go and I'm going to serve. I'm going to be a teacher for a few years and then do something else. I don't want to discourage people from that, but there's a lot of downsides to that I think people aren't thinking about. Whereas if you're in it for a while, like, I'm not that old, Marita. I'm going to turn 50 this summer. And if I wanted to, I could retire this summer. Like, I could be done as a 50-year-old. And now there are financial incentives for me to stay in a little bit longer before I retire. But like, and that's after a 25-year career, which is awesome. Like, I feel like I'm still a young person that could go and do a lot of things if I really wanted to. And so it does provide options, but part of that is because of the longevity of being in the career. The other thing, and this kind of goes back to the AI piece, is AI going to replace teachers? AI is going to replace the content back and forth, the gaining of facts, like we talked about before, but AI is likely not going to replace the relational aspect, the personal aspect. And I know they're working on something like relational AI, which, okay, sure. But there's still something about sitting down with somebody. I don't think that piece of it will ever be replaced by technology.
No.
Motivation piece, that connecting of dots, that connecting of feelings between who somebody is and what they might want to do. And again, that's my favorite part of the job. That's my favorite being an educator.
Yeah.
I think even as technology continues to dominate, I still think that the heart of the jobs in education are going to stay the same.
Yep, I would agree. All right, Nathan, a couple more questions. So if you could do it all over again, your career, would you choose the same career or would you pick something different?
I think I would pick the same career. I think it's a fun exercise. Like, what would my life be like if I had done something different? Yeah. And I think I'm not unique in this, but I have skills that probably could transcend different industries.
Yeah.
I probably could have gone into business, or I probably could have become a pastor that I've talked about and maybe found some great rewards with that. But I'm also super happy with the way my career has turned out and the work that I've done that I'm pretty sure I would choose that again. But there is the open-ended, like,
yeah,
what would it look like?
Right. Well, something I think that's interesting, I want you to touch on, is that you thought maybe you wanted to go into business and you started studying it, and then you changed, and then you ended up in education. However, now you are kind of in a business capacity role in starting a new school again, a completely different model, and that model is going to be replicated. So you're almost creating a school system, which is more or less like a business. Can you go over what your new school model is and your next progression of your own career is?
Yeah. So I'm the executive director of Colorado Springs School of Technology, CSST, which is a school of innovation in Colorado Springs. That the idea behind it is we have an ecosystem of higher ed. I would even put city government, industry, and K-12 all working together rather than us working in silos and trying to solve the same problems in different ways. Instead, trying to come together to collaboratively solve these problems together. And so we're starting, the first one is actually co-located on the UCCS campus in the National Cybersecurity Building that also has Space ISAC and Exponential Impact, different organizations all in that same building. And it's kind of the proof point of this idea. I think Colorado Springs long-term needs multiple campuses, all with different industry backing, but it's not really what we need. It's not really solving our problems. And so instead, the whole focus of this is let's go to our business partners and bring them in to help us design it from the start. And make sure that, and then they need to continue to have say, because as their industry adapts and changes, our system has to be responsive and dynamic as well. I foresee in the not so distant future, maybe a series of 4 to 5 career focused high schools in Colorado Springs, all with different government, higher ed and industry partners.
That is so cool.
Yeah, me too.
Very excited.
Yeah.
So last question is, what would you say is your best career advice?
Yeah. And I have 2 college age children of my own who actually are back living in my house right now. And we're having these conversations. And my advice to them that I would give to everyone is you don't have to figure everything out. You just have to take the next step. You just have to figure out the next step. Because if you would have gone back to me as a freshman in college and a business major, like when I switched from being a business major, it felt huge. It felt massive. Like you are changing the trajectory of the rest of your life. And then, I was supposed to graduate in May and change my major in February to education. And people thought I was nuts, but I was like, no, I just need to figure out the next step. And I think sometimes we get so hung up on the long term that there are on ramps and off ramps all over the place. And so, and there's not one path, right? Like, I think sometimes there's this idea that there's one path and we have to find our way onto that path. And I'm a big believer there's 100 paths and you can jump back and forth between the different paths. At some point, well, you just have to keep moving forward though, right? Like if you ever stop moving forward, that's when you're in trouble. As long as you're moving forward. And I look back, I mean, my story was like, you can connect the dots looking back. Okay, I was a business major. Now I'm really kind of running a business school and run my own businesses. And then, okay, you wanted to be a pastor, but you didn't like it because you really wanted to be around young people, but now you're around young people all the time and trying to, dare I say, speak life into them and trying to help them to really fulfill their destinies. Like you can look, and then I was a coach for a while. And I still coach. I coach adults, I coach kids, I coach myself. And so looking back, all of those experiences shaped me into who I am today. And none of those were mistakes. And so, I would just encourage young people, like, just take the next step. And it may not make sense right now, but someday looking back.
And it doesn't have to be the right step, right? Like it's just a forward step and it may be the right decision and it may not, but it's all towards forward progress.
Right. Absolutely. And get out of the idea that there's a right and wrong answer to that. Right. Yeah. That would be my advice.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Nathan. I love having you on the podcast today.
Yeah.
It was a real treat and I always enjoy talking to you.
All right. Time to you too, Marita, and best of luck on the new podcast.
Thank you for joining us today. Our goal is to help listeners discover meaningful careers that bring them joy and purpose. If you have a friend who is considering going into education and might benefit from today's discussion with Nathan, please share this episode with them. Want even more career insights? Subscribe to this podcast and join our community at getcareercurious.com for exclusive content and behind-the-scenes access of the podcast that you won't find anywhere else. Thank you again for joining me, Marita McCahill, in this episode of Get Career Curious. I'll see you next time.